Something is shifting faster than your mind can keep up with, and whether you have the words for it yet or not, you are already inside the pressure of it, because in just 2 days, on May 4th, there is a cosmic alignment forming that refuses to be ignored. And I am not saying that lightly. This is one of those rare moments where the sky is not whispering. It is demanding, where the energy is not subtle. It is undeniable. And what we are looking at here is Mars in Aries forming a square to Jupiter in Cancer. And I know that might sound technical at first, but stay with me. Because what this actually translates to in your life is a surge of momentum that can feel both electrifying and overwhelming at the same time. This is not the kind of influence that gently encourages you. This is the kind that confronts you with a choice. Expand or stay where you are, and what makes this even more intense is that this force does not wait for your comfort. It does not pause until you feel prepared. It moves whether you move with it or not. And if you have recently felt this quiet agitation under your skin, like something inside you is no longer willing to settle, like there is a part of you that keeps nudging you toward a decision you have been postponing, that is not coincidence. That is alignment. And there is a very specific reason your internal world feels like it is being stirred right now, and I am going to guide you through it. But before we get there, you need to understand something that most people completely overlook about this moment. There is a narrow window connected to this transit that closes on May 4th, and if you let it pass without engaging, you may find yourself later questioning why you remained in the same place when everything was trying to move you forward. And I will walk you through exactly what that means. But first, you need to see what is actually happening beneath the surface, because this is not just another passing influence. This is structure meeting pressure, and pressure creates change. Now here is where it gets real. When we talk about a square in astrology, we are talking about a 90-degree angle between two planetary forces, and that angle represents friction. Not harmony, not ease, but tension that demands resolution. It is like two powerful voices speaking at the same time, each insisting on a different direction. And when both of those voices are at full strength, the experience becomes intense, and on May 4th at 10 at night. That is exactly what forms Mars and Jupiter lock into a perfect square. And what makes this even more significant is where each of them is positioned. Mars is in Aries, which is its home territory, the place where its energy is direct, unfiltered, and unstoppable. It acts without hesitation, without second-guessing. It is pure forward motion, and at the same time, Jupiter is in Cancer, a placement where it expresses its most elevated qualities, expanding through emotional depth, through protection, through the need to build something that feels secure and meaningful. And when I first truly grasped what this combination represents, it changed the way I saw this entire period. Because what you have here is action at its most raw colliding with growth. At its most expansive, neither one stepping back, neither one softening. And that collision is where transformation begins. Mars in Aries is the voice inside you that says, "Go now," even if you are not ready. Even if you are uncertain, it is the impulse to move, to initiate, to fight for something that matters to you. It does not ask for approval. It does not wait for conditions to be perfect. It simply acts. But Jupiter in Cancer carries a very different message. It wants to grow, but it wants that growth to feel safe. To be rooted in something stable, it is concerned with emotional grounding, with belonging, with protecting what you have already built. And this is where the tension forms. Because one part of you is pushing forward, while another part is holding on. One part is fueled by urgency, while the other is guided by caution. One is fire, the other is water. And when these two meet in a square, something has to shift. Something has to be redefined. And if you pause for a moment and reflect, you may recognize this exact dynamic playing out within you recently. That internal back and forth, that sense of wanting to take a bold step, while simultaneously feeling the weight of what you could lose, That is not random. That is you responding to this alignment before it even becomes exact. Because here is what you need to understand. These transits do not appear suddenly and vanish. Just as quickly they build. They intensify over time, and you are already in the middle of that build-up. If over the past week you have felt a strange restlessness, like you are standing on the edge of something without knowing exactly what it is, that is part of this energy. If you have experienced moments where confidence rises sharply only to be followed by doubt, that is the tension between these two forces growing stronger. If your thoughts have been drifting toward big changes, major decisions, or actions you have been avoiding for months, that is not your imagination. That is the signal becoming clearer. And even on a personal level, I can tell you, this push and pull is real. That simultaneous desire to move forward in a big way while also feeling the instinct to stay within what feels familiar. And I want you to really sit with that for a second, because the more you recognize this pattern, the more you begin to understand that what you are feeling is not confusion. It is activation. And once you see that the way you respond to what comes next begins to change, just when you think you understand the pressure building, something else clicks into place, and suddenly everything you've been feeling starts to make a different kind of sense. Because before that exact square between Mars in Aries and Jupiter in Cancer even arrives on May 4th, there was already a powerful emotional wave that passed through on May 1st, and that was the full moon in Scorpio. And if the past few days felt heavier than usual, if your emotions seemed sharper, deeper, harder to ignore, that was not random. Scorpio full moons have a reputation for pulling things up from beneath the surface. Not the easy things, not the comfortable parts of your life, but the layers you usually keep hidden even from yourself. The habits you know are not serving you. The patterns you keep repeating, even when you promise yourself you will not. The truths you have been avoiding, because facing them would require change. And what I believe happened during that full moon was not chaos for the sake of chaos. It was a clearing process, almost like the universe was stripping away the weight you have been carrying, so that you cannot pretend it is not there anymore, because you cannot move forward while holding on to what is already trying to fall away. And if you think about it, trying to step into something new while still gripping old emotional baggage is like trying to run while carrying something that keeps pulling you backward. Eventually, something has to be released. And that is exactly what that Scorpio full moon was forcing. It was not gentle, it was not optional, it was necessary, it was preparing you, even if it did not feel like preparation in the moment. It was creating space so that when May 4th arrives, you are not weighed down by what no longer belongs in your next chapter. And then right after that, on May 2nd, another shift quietly stepped in. Mercury moved into Taurus. And this piece is more important than most people realize, because Mercury governs how you think, how you process, how you communicate. It is the lens through which your mind interprets everything happening around you. And Taurus brings a completely different energy, grounded, steady, practical, rooted in reality. So even though what is building with Mars and Jupiter is intense, fiery, almost overwhelming, there is this stabilizing influence running underneath it, like an anchor keeping you from drifting too far into impulsive or reckless decisions. And this is where the balance becomes critical, because without that grounding, the force of Mars in Aries squaring Jupiter in Cancer could easily push someone into actions that are bold but not sustainable. But with Mercury in Taurus, there is a chance to stay connected to what is real, to move with intention, even while the urgency is rising, to take risks without completely losing your sense of stability. And when you step back and look at all of this together, the sequence becomes clear. The emotional purge happened first. The grounding energy came in next. And now everything is aligned in a way that is pointing toward movement, not contemplation, not hesitation, but action. And this is where it becomes personal. Because this energy is not asking you to think about what you want, it is asking you to decide, and more than that, to move on that decision. And what I'm about to say may feel intense, but I want you to really hear it. I believe there are three bold actions that this alignment is pushing you toward before May 4th. And these are not comfortable. They are not easy. They are not the kind of steps you take when you feel safe. They are the kind you take when something inside you refuses to stay the same any longer. And the first one is the hardest to face. It is the moment where you stop waiting to feel ready and you act anyway, because Mars in Aries does not operate on preparation. It does not wait for certainty. It responds to instinct, to that inner fire that tells you this matters. And it matters now. And with Jupiter amplifying that energy, the call becomes louder, stronger, almost impossible to ignore. So whatever it is you have been holding back from, whatever action you have been postponing because you keep telling yourself you need more time or more clarity or more security, this is the moment where that excuse begins to fall apart. And it could look different for each person. It could be walking away from something that has been draining you for longer than you want to admit. It could be finally speaking a truth you've kept inside. It could be choosing to invest in yourself in a way that feels uncomfortable. It could be closing a chapter that you know deep down is no longer aligned, or stepping into something new that feels uncertain. But right at the same time, and the realization that shifts everything here, is understanding that waiting for perfect conditions during this kind of alignment is not wisdom. It is avoidance. Because the nature of this energy is not to give you guarantees before you move. It is to show you that support appears after you commit. Jupiter in Cancer represents that safety, that sense of being held. But Mars has to initiate the movement first. And if you hesitate, if you allow fear to keep you still, that same energy does not disappear. It turns inward. It becomes tension, frustration, a quiet awareness that you are not using what is available to you. And alongside that external action, there is another layer that runs just as deep. Because while one part of this alignment is pushing you outward, another part is asking you to look inward and restructure what is holding you up. And this is where Jupiter in Cancer becomes impossible to ignore, because it is not just about expansion. It is about the emotional foundation that supports that expansion. It is about your sense of security, your connection to home, to family, to belonging to the spaces where you feel safe enough to be fully yourself. And when it forms that square to Mars, the message becomes clear. If you're going to reach for something bigger, your internal structure has to be strong enough to sustain it. And that leads to the second bold move, which is not visible on the outside, but maybe even more challenging. It is the decision to completely reorganize your emotional world, not slightly adjust it, not gently improve it, but transform it in a way that feels honest. And that can mean setting boundaries you have avoided because you did not want to disrupt relationships. It can mean stepping away from dynamics that have quietly been draining your energy. It could mean asking for a level of depth and vulnerability that feels uncomfortable because it requires you to be seen more clearly. Or it can mean investing real effort into creating an environment around you that actually supports your well-being instead of undermining it. And this is where the work becomes real. Because you cannot build something expansive on a foundation that is unstable. And as you begin to see how these pieces connect, you start to realize that what is being asked of you is not random. It is precise. It is intentional. And it is leading you toward a version of your life that requires both courage and honesty. And as we move deeper into this, there is still one more layer you need to understand. Because the final shift ties everything together in a way you may not expect. Here is the truth that most people avoid, until it is too late. You cannot create something powerful in your outer world if the structure holding you up internally is unstable. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment, because this is where so many people unknowingly block their own breakthroughs. They push forward. They take the leap. They chase the opportunity. But underneath all of that movement, there is chaos. There is emotional exhaustion. There are relationships that drain instead of support. And when that happens, even if success arrives, it cannot stay. It slips through their hands because there is nothing solid to hold it in place. And that is why this moment before May 4th matters more than you think. Because it is asking you to look at your private world with a level of honesty that might feel uncomfortable, even confronting. And to ask yourself what needs to change so that what you are about to build does not collapse under its own weight. And this is where the pattern of self-sabotage begins to reveal itself. Because it is not always about fear of failure. Sometimes it is about being unprepared to hold success, about not having created an environment that can sustain growth, so before that square locks in. There is a question you cannot avoid. What, in your inner life, in your home, in your closest connections, needs to be restructured without hesitation, so that when opportunity expands, you are not pulled backward by what you refuse to address. And as soon as you start to recognize that another layer of this timeline begins to unfold, because what happens next does not ease the intensity, it deepens it. And this is where the third movement comes, in the one that most people underestimate, because less than 24 hours after that exact Mars in Aries square to Jupiter in Cancer on May 4th, there is another alignment forming on May 5th, and this one shifts everything into a different kind of pressure. Mercury in Taurus forms a square to Pluto in Aquarius, and if you understand Pluto even a little, you know this is not surface-level energy. This is depth. This is exposure. This is the kind of force that pulls truth out of places you did not even realize you were hiding it. And when Mercury, the planet of thought and communication, connects with Pluto in this way, it creates a mental intensity that is impossible to ignore. It reveals what has been buried. It brings conversations to the surface that cannot be postponed any longer. It exposes power dynamics, hidden motives, and internal contradictions. And if you have just made a bold decision the day before, if you have stepped into something new or closed a chapter that needed to end, then what follows is not quiet. It is a moment of reckoning, and that reckoning can take many forms. It can show up as someone questioning your choice, pushing back against the change you initiated. It can arise as your own doubts becoming louder, forcing you to confront whether you truly believe in the path you chose. It can manifest as a conversation you have been avoiding, finally demanding your attention, or as a realization about yourself or someone close to you that you can no longer ignore. And this is why the third bold move is not about action in the traditional sense. It is about truth. It is about being willing to speak honestly, to listen honestly, and to face what is revealed without turning away. And this does not mean confrontation for the sake of conflict. It means clarity. It means removing illusion. It means choosing authenticity even when it feels uncomfortable, because whatever you begin on May 4th will only become stable if you're willing to meet the truth that follows on May 5th. And I know that may sound intense, but there is a reason for it. Because if you move through all three of these layers, if you take the leap, if you rebuild your emotional foundation, and if you face what is revealed with honesty, then what comes after is not collapse. It is transformation. And this is where the timeline begins to shift again, because after this wave of intensity, there is a moment where everything starts to settle. On May 6th, Pluto stations retrograde. And while that might sound heavy at first, what it actually does is turn that deep transformative energy inward. The external pressure begins to soften, the visible conflicts quiet down, and you are given space to process what just happened, to integrate the changes, to understand the deeper meaning behind the choices you made. And then, almost 2 weeks after that initial square on May 16th, something new begins. A new moon in Taurus. And this is where everything becomes tangible, because Taurus is not about chaos. It is about stability, about building something that lasts, about turning ideas and breakthroughs into real-world results. So all of that intensity, all of that movement, all of those decisions now have a place to land. This is where you begin to plant the seeds of a new reality, one that is grounded, one that reflects the changes you made, one that can grow over time instead of collapsing under pressure. And this is why May 16th matters, because it is the point where you start to see the results of what you chose to do earlier, where the abstract becomes concrete, where the energy becomes form. And when you look at this entire sequence, it becomes clear that this is not chaos without direction. It is a process. It is movement that leads somewhere. And now the question becomes how this shows up specifically for you. Because while the overall energy is shared, the way it plays out depends on where it touches your life. And for some, especially if you have strong Aries placements, this becomes deeply personal because Mars is moving through your first house. The space connected to identity, to how you see yourself, to how you show up in the world, while Jupiter is expanding the area connected to home and family. So the tension here is not abstract, it is direct. It is about redefining who you are while simultaneously navigating changes in your personal environment. It is about stepping into a new version of yourself while facing the realities of your foundation. And as you begin to feel that, you start to realize that this is not just an external shift, it is a complete realignment of who you are becoming and the life that must evolve to support that version of you. What you are about to do is not something that stays hidden. It is not subtle. It is not something you can quietly think your way through and hope no one notices. The leap connected to this alignment is visible. It is tangible. It shows up in your actions, in your choices, in the way you move through the world, and depending on where this energy is touching your chart. The story unfolds differently, but the pressure feels just as real for those with strong Cancer placements. This moment is deeply personal because Jupiter is expanding your sense of self. It is asking you to grow into a version of yourself that is more confident, more expressive, more willing to be seen. But at the same time, Mars is activating your career sector, creating tension around how you show up professionally, and that tension can feel like a push from both directions. One part of you wants to step forward boldly, to claim recognition, to lead, to stop minimizing your abilities, while another part feels the friction of responsibility, expectation, and the fear of being judged. And this is where your bold move lives. It is in the decision to stop shrinking in your professional life, to speak up, to take space, to claim what you have earned, even if it challenges the structures you have been used to. And if you're a Libra, the pressure shifts into your relationship axis, where Mars is stirring movement and possibly conflict within your partnerships, while Jupiter is expanding your public life and career path. And what that creates is a moment where you may realize that certain dynamics in your relationships are no longer aligned with the direction you are trying to grow into, and the tension here is not easy, because it asks you to choose yourself without falling into guilt, to set boundaries that feel strong and clear, even if it disrupts the balance you've been trying to maintain. And that choice can feel uncomfortable, because it goes against your instinct to keep the peace. But this alignment is not about maintaining comfort, it is about aligning with growth. And for Capricorn, the story moves into the space between home and relationships, where Mars is pushing you to address issues in your personal environment, your living situation, your family dynamics, while Jupiter is expanding your opportunities for connection and partnership. And what that means is that before you can fully step into those new connections, something in your foundation needs to be confronted directly. It may require you to dismantle structures that no longer support you, to make changes in your home life that feel intense but necessary, so that there is room for something more aligned to enter. And when you step back and look at all of these examples, the pattern becomes clear. Wherever Mars and Jupiter are activating your chart, that is where the friction exists, and within that friction is the exact point where your breakthrough is trying to happen. And if you are not sure where that is for you, you do not need a perfect map to find it. You just need to notice where you feel the most restless, the most resistant, the most pulled in, two directions at once. Because that is usually where the energy is asking you to move. And this is why I need to be direct with you. This window is not open forever. This kind of alignment, where two powerful planets are both operating at their highest strength and forming a challenging aspect, does not happen often. And when it does, it creates a moment that is rare. A moment where change is not just possible, but accelerated. And the reality of any window is that it closes. After May 4th, the exact square begins to separate. Mars continues forward. Jupiter shifts the intensity, starts to soften. And the momentum that is available right now begins to fade. And what you choose not to do during this time does not disappear. It becomes heavier. It becomes harder to access. Because the push that was helping you move is no longer there. And I have seen this pattern repeat again and again. People feel the energy building. They sense that something is about to shift. They even know what they need to do. But they hesitate. They analyze. They wait for a moment that feels more certain. And then the moment passes, and they find themselves in the same place wondering why nothing changed. And I do not want that to be your story, because if you are here, if you have stayed with this all the way through, there is a reason for that. You are not here by accident. You are here because something in you recognizes this energy, because something in you is ready to respond to it. And now the question becomes clear. What is the leap you already know you need to take? What is the action you have been delaying? What is the truth you have been avoiding? What part of your life is asking to be rebuilt so that something stronger can take its place? You have 2 days. Just 2 days to decide whether you will stay where you are or move toward what is calling you, and yes, it may feel overwhelming. It may feel like a lot to hold at once. But there is something else you need to remember. You are more prepared than your fear is telling you. You are stronger than the hesitation that keeps showing up. And even if you cannot see the outcome yet, even if you cannot fully map what comes next, there is support in this energy. Jupiter does not abandon it, expands, it protects, it creates opportunity, but it responds to action. Mars initiates, and Jupiter meets it. So the movement has to start with you. And that is why this moment matters. Because once you decide, once you act, everything that follows begins to shift in response. And if you have stayed with me to this point, I want you to know I appreciate that. Because it means you are paying attention. It means you are open to something changing. And if this resonated with you, if you feel that pull to go deeper, I invite you to stay connected, to keep exploring this with me. Take care of yourself. Trust what you feel, and I will see you in what comes next.